Welcome to a community conversation about how the coronavirus is affecting students with learning obstacles. Today we'll focus on the needs of students experiencing poverty, English language learners, and students with special education needs. This is a project of KPBS and the National Conflict Resolution Center. KPBS education reporter Joe Hong hosts our conversation tonight. He'll be joined by Mike Paredes, the principal of Monarch School in the Barrio Logan area of San Diego. The Monarch School educates students impacted by homelessness from kindergarten through 12th grade. Leticia Avelar is a single parent of 2 children on the autism spectrum and a special education teacher. And Jorge Cuevas Antillón is San Diego County Office of Education's advisor on curriculum and instruction for English learners. We'll begin with a moderated discussion with members of our panel, and then we'll open the conversation to your questions. Following the event, the National Conflict Resolution Center will facilitate smaller group discussions on Zoom. Thank you for taking part in this community conversation.
Hi, I'm Tom Carlo, General Manager of KPBS. Welcome to Community Conversations, educational discussions that explore the issues you care about. Our mission at KPBS is to provide San Diegans with stories that make us think, help us dream, and keep us connected. And we hope Community Conversations will help you gain knowledge that will spark questions, insights, and thoughtful dialogue. This program is made possible by Rady Children's Hospital Auxiliary and California State University San Marcos, and we are grateful for their support. And now I'd like to introduce Steve Dinkin, the president of the National Conflict Resolution Center. Steve?
Thank you, Tom. The National Conflict Resolution Center addresses issues in society through mediation, communication training, and restorative dialogue. Tonight's discussion will give you the opportunity to brainstorm solutions using the restorative dialogue process, facilitated by our trained staff who are respectful of all points of view. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and please enjoy the panel discussion.
Hello, and welcome to tonight's community conversation. My name is Joe Hong, and I'm the education reporter at KPBS. The COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked havoc on our public education system. State and county-wide, public education has become a patchwork of approaches. Some elementary school districts in San Diego County are beginning to reopen. Others, however, like San Diego Unified, are beginning a phased reopening by scheduling appointments for their neediest students. Other districts are continuing exclusively online. This patchwork of approaches has presented challenges for all students and their families. But most importantly, the public health crisis has revealed the pre-existing crisis in educational equity. Today, I'll be speaking with 3 people who have dedicated their lives to working with students most vulnerable to falling behind during distance learning. So first, I want to go to Leticia Avelar, who is a single mother of 2 sons on the autism spectrum. Leticia, your sons are still doing virtual learning. Can you tell us a little bit about what a typical day looks like for you and your sons?
Well, my sons are in the Mod Severe program with San Diego Unified School District, so they're still doing virtual learning. I'm teaching as well at the same time as they're on virtual learning. So basically, it's like it's a show. I will be online, and my sons kind of will get online at around 11 or 12, and they're on there with their teachers. Luckily, my older son is very independent, so he can somewhat, function and do the online learning. But my younger son needs extra support to just interact with the teachers. He still doesn't somewhat understand that this is school. School's on the computer and at home. So he requires a lot of support. But because I'm teaching around the same times that he's online on the computer, I have to pick and choose what times he can participate, what he can and can't do. So it's been very difficult to just facilitate the whole online learning thing from, my point of view as a parent.
And you're also a special education teacher, correct? Can you tell us, has that been helpful? Has your training been helpful in working with your sons right now?
I was a paraeducator for 5 years before I am a education specialist. So that in itself was very helpful. This is actually my first year teaching, and I'm first year teaching in a pandemic, which makes, the whole first year where you feel like you don't know anything even worse. Like you really feel like you don't know anything. So it's been difficult, but I am also thankful that I do have this training because I know how to work with my children. I know the strategies, I know the accommodations, I know the modifications, I know what works best for them. And it makes me, feel empathetic towards parents who have, zero to, very little experience in special education. And, I wonder how they're facilitating this program in their homes, because it's hard for me as an educator. I can, not even imagine what it's like for somebody who's never done this before.
And so what are you hearing from your parents, from the parents of your students? What are their experiences like right now?
I have not heard from my parents yet because it's actually my first year teaching, my first week, actually, sorry. I came on late to the school year, but I do know a lot of parents in the disabled community, and a lot of them are very frustrated with the whole online learning situation. They feel like their kids aren't really getting much out of the curriculum, and they somewhat feel left out of the loop with what, the plan is going forward with everything. A lot of things that I hear are that parents just want to know there's kind of like an end in sight. There's like an end game that their kids are going to go back to school. And, I somewhat try to, help them with what I can and, help support them in what they need, but it's still a big task to do. And
I'm curious, so this might sort of be an obvious question for a parent of students with special needs, but what makes distance learning hard for your sons in particular?
My sons require a lot of visual prompting, a lot of verbal prompting, a lot of things like a paraprofessional. And I do not have those at home, or, I'm kind of teaching on the go sometimes. I go where the area is the quietest and we're in different locations. So sometimes just the verbal prompting, the visual prompting, the extra assistance, I don't have that. And that's what makes it difficult. My son's teacher has been very good with, giving ideas of how we can facilitate these things. But I know if I didn't have the experience in special education, I might not be able to, make the visuals and do the things that need to be done.
I want to take this opportunity to remind our viewers that they can post their own questions below, and we will have a chance to respond to those later in the conversation. At this point, I want to bring in Jorge Cuevas Antillón into the conversation. He works for the County Office of Education and serves as a resource for teachers of English language learners. Jorge, what have the teachers you work with told you about the challenges they face in teaching English virtually?
A lot of English learning is actually acquisition, and it's a distinction that we make in education that's really important. So acquisition means that you're going through a phase of picking up a language by interacting with other people, whereas learning is the moment in which there's some kind of formal instruction and you might be doing something that's more disassociated from genuine communication. But it's actually authentic dialogue that makes the most difference. And depending on which school district teachers find themselves in, there might be some challenges in creating opportunities where students can actually talk with one another and have that general opportunity to be able to learn English by interacting and collaborating. And so that's probably one of our biggest difficulties right now is we don't have the same opportunities for what we call oracy. Oracy is oral language development, the equivalent of literacy, which is super important for English learners.
And so how do the services and individual attention English learners usually get during the school year sort of compare to what they're getting now?
Well, you can imagine, like everything else, we have a shorter day, which means, of course, that the amount of time on task for different subject areas is not probably what it used to be. We always had a requirement for English learners to have designated English language development. That's a period of time in which English learners are actually grouped together and provided instruction in and about English for the level of proficiency that they find themselves in. Right now, that's rendered a lot more difficult in terms of the challenges with grouping students with distance learning. And also, a teacher has to squeeze in other subject areas. Now, designated ELD is actually a requirement for students. It's a core subject area, so definitely students are receiving it. But whereas before, we would have the opportunity for spontaneous interactions, dialogue, physical, concrete items in front of the students, those things are not as available or are readily picked up by students in a distance learning format because everything is, of course, less tangible.
And is there a concern that distance learning will ultimately delay their language acquisition and sort of have these long-term effects?
Well, that's an interesting question because right now the state testing is, of course, on hiatus as we try to get through the crisis. And so the comparison of data will be difficult anyway. I'm still a believer in the resiliency of children and the ability of youth to also make the best use of their assets. The more we believe in students and make it possible for them to have opportunities, the more likely they will get through this crisis and actually accelerate their learning as opportunities arise and things begin to return to normal. I don't think students are necessarily broken permanently. So I know the term learning loss is out there from the state, but we try to focus on acceleration and the belief that our students will actually get back to par once we're together. You can imagine in the future that we would offer interventions and opportunities for students to catch up in ways that are hopefully more intensive if we are to receive the kind of funding that we need in our school systems once everything starts to recover. I would think that there would be chances for students to get individualized support and more intensive support for English acquisition to make up for the time that they didn't have it now.
And just one follow-up to that. You mentioned those special programs. What would those sort of look like?
Well, a kind of thing that students would get for supplemental education would be summer opportunities, after-school opportunities, intersession, which means the dates in which there isn't school going on. So those kind of opportunities are still going to be real for us during distance learning, but they're all the better when you're able to do things in person. So rather than thinking about teaching English in isolation, you can think about students acquiring English in more genuine ways for doing projects that actually matter to them. Perhaps there's a project that has to do with recovering the environment in their local community, perhaps restoring the watershed, or there could be projects for building robots. There could also be projects that have students creating poetry or doing theater for their community and presenting it, for example, in places where there are retirement communities so they can watch the students perform. These are the kinds of enriching activities that allow students to really genuinely use the language for a purpose that has real value in the lives of their community.
And so teachers often talk about the need to form interpersonal bonds with their students. And I imagine for language acquisition, that's quite important. And so that has to be much more difficult over Zoom, right?
We can't sugarcoat the fact that we have a situation now that is really untenable for most teachers. The majority have joined this profession because they really care about kids and youth. And so they gravitate towards the interaction and the natural human development that we have when we are in charge of helping students do what they need to do to become fully competent, eventually adults, but also just model citizens and democratic participants. So that part is really hard for us. Right now, if I'm talking to you in a different language, it would seem all the more odd. And it's really strange to have a teacher that's only there virtually in front of you. And you can imagine what it's like for a student who's very new to the language to see this person and not understanding what they're saying when they're showing frowns or lines of concern on their face. So yeah, it's super hard. And luckily, most teachers are super empathetic, and they are really building their social, emotional work right now around getting the communities to bond, getting to know individual students, and to doing their best to actually form relationships that make the heart of learning possible.
Mike Paredes is also joining us. He's the principal at the Monarch School, which focuses on serving students who have experienced homelessness. When the pandemic first hit, you assigned your staff members to be case managers to the families of your students. Mike, can you tell me how that has helped with those essential connections that Jorge was talking about?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah, I can't take all the credit for that. Something that's really unique about Monarch School is that we work in a partnership. We're a San Diego County Office of Education school that works in close partnership with a nonprofit called the Monarch School Project. And so on March 13th, a day that all of us will just have that, it'll be ingrained in our minds forever. Our team got together and decided to identify families who would need immediate support. In fact, every single one of our families, we have nearly 175 families here at Monarch, representing about 300 students. We're a K through 12 school. They were assigned to 2 staff members from the Monarch School Project, so that immediately we could begin providing some supports with basic needs to our families. And that all started March 16th. So we were getting ready on March 13th, talking about how important relationships would be, and then began providing support to our families beginning on that first Monday. And that's been critical, Joe. That's been critical. I mean, and that's what the entire team has done and just replicated. Our teaching staff, our classroom support staff, the Monarch Project staff, the community that supports our school. The number one thing has been relationships.
Can you say a little more about what those case managers do to help the students? How do they support learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So, initially, when we all went into closure, the thinking that we might just be closed for a few weeks. So initially the goal was, what can we do to provide that support to get through the next few weeks? Because so many of our families are so closely connected to our school. Some of our families had some housing needs, and they got put into some temporary housing situations in some nearby hotels. We've been continued to reach out. Our case managers are reaching out a couple times per week minimum to our families to see if there are any immediate needs, making sure that if there are any connection issues, technology needs, kind of serving as liaisons sometimes between myself and other staff members, just providing that support and that connection to the families. Our families are able to come up to the school site on scheduled distribution days to receive academic support material, hygiene products, a well-rounded lunch, and gift cards, so that they can we can ensure that the family is able to go shopping and acquire whatever it is that they need during this difficult time.
And across the board, parents, educators, we're all worried about, students, how they're going to be when in-person learning resumes. Are they going to fall back academically and sort of emotionally as well? And can you say a little more about some of the unique concerns that you have with the students that you work with?
Yeah, I'd love to talk on that. And I think that, earlier, both Leticia and Jorge mentioned some things that I think all of us are worried about. We've got families who are experiencing their own turmoil, right? We have families that have lost jobs, families that are parents that are continuing to work, and then also, serve as caregivers to their children and even teachers at home. And then we also have, the emotional supports. Jorge talked about all the work that's being done by a lot of our educators around social emotional learning and how critical that has been. Thankfully, what we're seeing and what we're trying to prepare for is how we can continue to utilize some of the tools that we have at Monarch, and I know other schools are doing the same, providing counseling support. We have therapists, a team of therapists here at Monarch that have been able to provide teletherapy to some of our students and to some of our parents and families. That's like the utmost. I think that's our primary focus right now, is how are we going to be able to provide that type of support as students come back to our school sites. Because learning is one thing. We have students that are engaging in the academics. We have some students that are having a more difficult time, but they need to feel connected. I think those of us who are in education, we know that if students don't feel safe, it's going to be really difficult to learn. And right now there's a lot of fear, and that fear is justified. So, yeah.
And so my understanding is that at Monarch, you have 20% of your students not only have experienced homelessness, but also have a disability. Can you say a little bit about how those students have been impacted and sort of the additional obstacles that you face serving them?
Yeah, that's correct, Joe. We have approximately 20% of our students have special needs, and we do have a strong team of educators and classroom support staff that have been able to connect with our students to meet their extra instructional needs based on their IEPs. And so that sometimes means breakout sessions with special educators and para-educators, reaching out via phone, connecting on things like Classroom Dojo, whatever it takes. I think that's been the obstacle that most educators are facing right now is we want to connect, through whatever means possible, making phone calls, emails, getting on Google Hangout. And, the challenge, I think, is that we're missing that physical connection with our students, but we're doing everything we can to maintain that daily connection. And our special educators are doing a great job, and our para-educators as well.
And on that note, I want to circle back to Leticia and ask, as a parent, and as distance learning continues, what additional supports do you need from your school?
Personally, my son's school has been amazing. So we do have, the related services still. We do have the speech. We still have the occupational therapy, the APE, all of our supports are still in place. But in my situation, it's just the scheduled times that these things are happening. I'm not available to do them. So my children are missing out on those times. So, just maybe more opportunities throughout the week to engage in these activities, and maybe not just have it so set that, only on 9 o'clock we're going to get, speech. Maybe, taking that into consideration that families have different time schedules, and that way kids can fully engage in their virtual learning.
Is scheduling, has that been an issue as a teacher as well?
In my experience, no, we have a shortened day. So, the children have office hours. They have, and this is in high school though. So the children have office hours. They have different ways that they can get in touch with a teacher to get the support that they need, or a paraprofessional, or, me, an education specialist. There are plenty of opportunities, but, it's kind of not the same for the elementary school. My children, their situation isn't the same. There isn't, many opportunities for us to, get the services that we need. It's just these set times. And I get it. It's a time constraint when teaching, there's so much to get through in the day, but I just think maybe, there should be more opportunities.
And so for you, Mike, how has teaching been working at Monarch? Has it been fully virtual, or are you also relying a bit on, paper packets?
So like a lot of schools, have done initially, because we were lacking connectivity and devices, because we were not a one-to-one school prior to the closure. We did have to provide academic enrichment packets and paperwork. But thankfully, because of the support that we've received from the San Diego County Office of Education and the support from the Monarch School project, we've been able to provide students with devices, one-to-one devices. So every single one of our students had a device as of April. That first week of April, we were able to provide all of our students with a device. Now, connectivity was a difficulty. But there was a strong commitment, has been a strong commitment from our Monarch School project partners to acquire hotspot devices. So thankfully, we're 100% connected. Now, sometimes that number fluctuates because there are situations where families are moving and they may have been able to have Wi-Fi at one point and then they need a hotspot. But teaching has been virtual since April. It continues to be virtual. Everything is via distance learning. We do provide our students with additional materials as needed. They need paper material that's provided to them. It's helpful to have that, especially, given, the needs of some of our younger students, having the ability to do some, paper to pencil tasks. That's critical to their learning as well. So I'm so honored and grateful for the work that our teams have done, our Monarch School project team, our San Diego County Office of Education team here at Monarch, how they've been able to work collaboratively to make sure that our kids' needs are being met.
And how are you trying to improve that experience for students?
So one thing that, there's a lot of cool things. I could talk about what's happening with our K-5, in our K-5 community, because I kind of feel like we have like 3 schools in one: our K-5, our middle school, and our high school. With our littles, the majority of, nearly all of our elementary school teachers have they have their Bitmoji classroom. They want to make, things feel really cool and engaging for our kids. Our K through 3 teaching team is using Seesaw. The rest of our grade levels are using Google Classroom, but it's not just a platform. It's making sure that we're creating schedules, like Leticia was saying, that work for families and having some flexibility. For our high school students, our high school teachers, have been really mindful of some of the needs of our oldest students. We're typically on a semester schedule, and their out of the box thinking was, well, let's split our semester up into triads so that our students only have to focus on 2 classes at a time versus the 6 classes at a time. That would be overwhelming. Anybody who's taken a class online knows it's really hard to focus on 1 class at a time, let alone 6.
Right.
And so that's been extremely helpful, Joe. The out of the box thinking and the support that we're getting to be out of the box from the county, and then having a partner in this work like the Monarch School project to help support and provide funding for that.
Right. But, no matter how much education during the pandemic, might have improved, distance learning will obviously never be as good as the in-person experience. And at the early stages of the pandemic, educators talked a lot about, learning loss and regression. And we've sort of touched upon those topics during this conversation as well. I want to ask all 3 of you, what are your long-term concerns for when we go back in person for the years ahead? Leticia, I guess we'll start with you. What are some of the long-term concerns for you?
For my sons, I kind of was afraid about the academic loss, especially, with their disabilities and what's going on. But I was very surprised that when, they started engaging in the online learning, they were quick to just go back to where they were. It was easy for them, to get back into, this is what I'm doing. This is my learning, this is my academics. But the thing that scares me the most is the routine of just switching from online back to whatever type of in-school learning we're going to have. That's what I feel is going to be the hardest, in my situation as a parent, is just that extended amount of time being back home, how that's going to affect them when we do go back into online learning, in-person learning, whatever that environment is.
And Jorge, I want to, on that note, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about testing being on hiatus. And, I, as an education reporter, I rely a lot on data, on the data that the state publishes, and English learner data is part of that. And I guess, do you have long-term concerns about if we put testing on hiatus, how will we know just how much work there is left to do, or how much work educators have to do to accelerate that learning when we come back?
Well, Joe, that's a great question. So I will tell you that the framework for the state, the California Department of Ed's framework for English language arts and English language development, it has a chapter dedicated to assessment. And what it tells you is that the priority of assessment is teacher assessment, formative assessment, where they make the decision and they're the professional that can figure out what the student needs, how much the student has acquired, and how to proceed. We do have a system that has quarterly assessments in some districts and schools. We have a state system that relies on yearly data in order to report things for funding streams. But I do believe in the power of professionals making a judgment call about what students need to actually get from them to continue to improve their English proficiency. Now, I'm also a teacher myself because I teach at San Diego State University for future teacher credential candidates. And one thing that's sort of being missed, I feel horrible for all of these teacher credential candidates who are not having a normal experience of having kids around them in the classroom. There's a lot of human development that has to do with just kind of going into a classroom, managing a group of 20 young people, or 25 and 30 in some cases, and knowing how to deal with the humanity of this. So I think that's a concern of mine that I still have, higher ed, and not having the normal teaching credentialing experience that you would go through. That being said, I still am a believer that students are able to achieve a lot when we provide additional opportunities. And what matters to me is that we continue to provide a strong investment in public education, and that we think about equity and distribution of funding in the society and the way taxation works, so that we can ensure that our students who have the highest need, students who are migrants, students who are homeless, students who are transnational, students who are refugees, students who are English learners, students who are special ed, we need a system that includes funding for equity's sake, that is not distributing dollars just because, but really thinking about their needs. So in that respect, I'm with you, Joe, that assessments sometimes tell us what kids need, and we need data, but we also need to believe in the professionals on doing their best under the circumstances.
And now going to Mike, what are some of your concerns, that some challenges that you foresee down the pipeline in the next several years?
I mean, the learning loss is real. I think none of us can deny that. It's the challenge is going to be, how we bounce back. And to be honest, I think all of us could probably agree, distance learning, the type of learning platforms that we're using right now, they're not going away anytime soon either. Just because of how we're going to be able to safely navigate moving forward. And so it's felt like we're building the plane as we fly it. I think a lot of us have felt that way. My wife's a teacher, and I'm seeing her in her kindergarten class do this all the time. And I'm hearing from her, and I believe it about all of our students at Monarch, that what we're doing right now, it doesn't mirror what we were able to do with our students in person. And so I really, it's hard to say. I know that time's going to tell. I know that that all of our teachers, across the county, across the nation right now, are doing their best to assess our students' individual learning needs. And that's hard to do virtually. That's hard to do when you're distant. So it's like a question that's unanswered. And I think we're going to see how that's going to play out over the next few years.
If I may, I do want to also look at the glass being half full, because I don't think we've had this much technology distributed so equitably across the system. It normally is the case that high poverty students do not have access the way they are being provided now. They are becoming digital natives much sooner and in more profound ways than we had before. Also, I know that teachers are learning all kinds of new strategies and apps and resources that they had not necessarily considered before or were out of their reach. And suddenly those doors are being opened. So I think we're going to have a much richer classroom experience when kids come back, that we know that some of these tools and experiences will be useful for setting up a situation that hopefully can diffuse and more personalized learning for students. So I want to also just feel faith about our system and our educators and our administrators doing what they can.
Well, now I'd like to turn to some of the questions from the audience. This one is from Ali S. And I think this one's going to be for you, Mike. What do you think about childcare and in-person camps that take place after online learning?
So I'm actually gonna speak from firsthand experience. I do personally think that some of those camps, they're critical to the success of some of our students who can't get some of those additional supports at home for whatever reason. I mean, I think we've all kind of spoken about the challenges that our parents have, at home. So those camps actually, they feel, that need. I mean, there's some of the colleagues that are in the work, with Monarch and have been strong partners in the past are looking for ways to fund learning pods for our students so they can get that personal connection that's really hard to get, even with the best teacher online. I mean, it's having that connection. And as long as that's a safe environment, and they're following the procedures and, everything we know so far about COVID, I'm all for those opportunities, and I appreciate it, those partners who are looking for those opportunities for our kids, because our kids need that as we prepare to return back to in-person.
I'm wondering, Leticia, if you have anything to weigh in as a parent. Have you heard of any opportunities like camps or childcare opportunities for students with who might be on the autism spectrum or have a learning disability?
My kids were enrolled in primetime, and the only thing that they have done was just extended it into a virtual situation where they do supplement more education, more, they help with all the homework and the skills, and it's still on virtually, but it does help supplement some of those, things that the kids aren't getting in the classrooms, or it's not enough time, they get the help that they need. That's all in my experience.
If I could add also, Joe, we do have nonprofits that are still supporting our schools, that are our partners to us, that offer after school things. I myself am on the board for a nonprofit dedicated to, of all things, affordable housing in our state, which is another crisis within our state, because we know that it takes more than just education. We need stable communities. And what I want to point out is that a lot of these partners, such as Community Housing Works, which I support, do offer programs for supplemental education in the afternoon, and are trying to figure out ways to also entertain students, because it matters to offer students chances that are beyond just academic learning. We need students to actually grow in their talents and all the things that they actually love and embrace. And I also want to put a plug in for books. We're still distributing books. We still care about kids writing, and it really matters to us that they're actually exposed to something that's in hard print. It is a critical thing for us. And a lot of places are distributing books to our schools, and we're getting donations. We still would want more, folks. Give us more books.
Yeah, you can never have too many books. Mike, this one's for you from Vanessa F. Is there a plan for students to return to on-site for Monarch?
Yeah, so in regards to that question, we've been working on our prevention plan for return to learning, for the past 4 or 5 months. And, I know that as we all know, it was just a couple weeks ago where San Diego came off the watch list. The reality is that a lot of our families are still concerned about return to full, like in-person learning, even in hybrid mode. So while we don't have a date yet, we are going to be very mindful about how we return, because our student safety is going to be number one. I mean, we're seeing in the news, the most well-intended, well thought out plans are still resulting in some of our schools having to close. And I know we want to make sure that when we do return, that our students are safe, our staff is safe, that our community stays safe. But I do expect that we will likely return in a very intentional phase 2 model, where we can provide student support in a minimal day fashion, with a limited number of students on campus that are in stable cohorts. So yeah, I don't really have a clear date, but when we do, it's going to be safe, as safe as we possibly can be.
Thank you, Mike. Leticia, how are you feeling about your son's returning to school? Is that something that you're not ready for, you don't feel safe about, or it can't happen soon enough?
I'm all about the safety, but my sons are in very small class sizes because they are in a mod severe classroom. I am, open for them to go back to school in a phased way because, as a special needs parent, and especially like a single parent, the school provides like a support system for you that, it just felt like it got ripped away kind of. The teachers know your kids very well. The paras know your kids very well. All the related service providers know your kids. And to kind of like have that taken away, you feel a little bit alone. So I'm for them going back and, seeing all these people again and getting their supports as well, but doing it, in the safest way possible. And I think for every parent, there is no right or wrong choice. You make the best choice for your children, for your situation. So I'm for it.
And Jorge, how are you working to keep those supports in place, the supports that Leticia just mentioned?
The County Office of Education is working in collaboration with all of the school districts in a task force that is actually watching what the health ramifications are as options are opening up and being very cautious about it. They have very strong plans in place. I can only speak on behalf of myself when I say that I'm looking forward to widespread testing. I believe it's a necessary part of what will be the future society. I'm looking forward to the next federal government administration to take a serious look at widespread testing and to also ensure that we have a vaccination available, much like we expect of any other kind of disease that befalls our kids as they come to school, just to make everybody safe. So I think we need to proceed with a lot of caution. As Mike and Leticia say, we are very interested in regaining normalcy, but not at a cost of children's lives or the lives of our educators and administrators. So I would say that we need to pay attention to what the science is telling us about that and to notice what's happening in places that weren't well prepared as they did so.
And so how can we make sure, though, that parents and teachers have the supports while we continue distance learning?
One way is to think of checking in with teachers the way you do with your kids. You need to deal with the social emotional first. We're going through a lot of trauma as individuals. We're no different just because we're professionals. The difference is, though, we need to be in a situation where we get past the grief of our situation and inspire hope and inspire commitment and espouse joy of learning in our classroom. These things matter even more now than they did before. It's all of the art of teaching besides having materials and the means. And these are the things that we need to look forward to, because we need to build resiliency by checking in our way of approaching students, but also taking care of our own humanity as we do so. Those are the best kind of administrative and district policies that can be set, is just making sure that people are happy and healthy as employees, just like we take care of our kids.
Right. And Leticia, I want to ask you, do you have any advice for parents with students with special needs, considering you're both a teacher and a parent?
I would just like to say that, a lot of parents kind of feel like their child's teacher kind of left them out. Sometimes they feel like they are left out, but I just want them to know that we are in the same situation you are. We are trying our best to provide you and your child with support. And, we have our own situations at home going on, but as an educator, we will put the students, at the same level as our families. We are 100% there for you. And another advice is do not hesitate to contact your child's teacher with any questions, concerns. You can even let them know how your day was going. We are always open to hear anything. And that's something that my son's teacher does, is she'll start the Zoom and she'll be like, hey parents, how are you doing today? Just being, you can talk to your child's teacher about anything. Do not hesitate to ask. We are always there to help you.
Great. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up this conversation. Thank you to all of our viewers and to those who submitted questions. And thank you most of all to our panelists and who will continue to work with our most vulnerable students while navigating this pandemic. Thank you, Jorge, Mike, and Leticia for being here. And now please join the National Conflict Resolution Center with a conversation among your fellow audience members.
Thank you so much again to our panelists and moderator for a thought-provoking discussion. And the conversation isn't over yet. Each of us has our own connection to this topic, and we benefit as a community when all of our voices can be part of the conversation. I'd like to invite you into the second part of the event today, where you can share your thoughts, reflections, and personal perspectives on the conversation you've just heard. Join me and a wonderful team of facilitators from the National Conflict Resolution Center by clicking on the link below. You'll be whisked away to a Zoom room to add your voice to the conversation. Your perspective, your experience, and your wisdom are important, and we hope to see you there.